All right, JAG University, episode 16. Kevin Gazitua back from his 2-week hiatus. Welcome back.
Back by popular demand. Thank you.
Your YouTube fans were pounding at the table.
Yeah, all three of them were like, hey, come on.
My mom, your mom, and,
and the head of JAG Media.
And the head of JAG Media. But talk about something that I kind of actually bang on the table about is, why do you think not enough people buy flood insurance?
I think the reason is because nobody's making them.
I'm going to agree with you.
Yeah.
I think it's flood insurance through the clients we talk to on a daily basis. It's really viewed, I think for most people, as a lender requirement.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm only buying it because my bank requires it. I mean, you've had people when they're buying a new house, it's funny, we're in this process of helping them kind of through, navigate different quotes and getting them set up. The first thing they say, hey, and I'm not in the flood zone, so I don't need it.
Exactly. Yeah. They're relieved, that they don't need to buy flood.
It's a hard anchor. They're stopping us from even getting to that second point.
It's a selling feature of the house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
From the seller buyer, hey, don't worry about that expense. You're never going to use it. I mean, I think that mindset really has to kind of change. I mean, talk about flood insurance. You see it all over the news. I mean, we live in South Florida. So I'd argue with anybody where we live, which is paradise, check the weather recently, the last couple of weeks, right?
It's pretty sweet.
Pretty sweet. But we're in South Florida. I think you are in a flood zone. Regardless, and if we go to the maps, that's another thing too. Obviously, banks go based off FEMA's flood, their map that they've, basically done through various different datas and stat points that it's really above my pay grade. But if you break it down, I mean, there's literally a couple blocks. There's neighbors that are split to some being in a flood zone, not in a flood zone.
Yeah. It's like, okay, you move 30 feet away and like you're totally out of the danger zone now, apparently.
You're safe. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
How lucky.
Hey, but what's changing now, and this happened last year. We had a couple of hurricanes come. Now we're looking at the flood surge maps, right? That's kind of the new factor, right? Before it was more not evacuation zones. How many clients called us about 3 miles inland that they were in an evac zone, stressed out about, honestly, what's happening? I mean, whether you're stents or not, but the water's getting higher. The water's coming in faster. And there are a lot of factors in that really need to be talked about, where flood insurance is a catastrophic peril that you need to kind of take care of.
Yeah. I mean, in the human history, it's always like the 1 in 1,000 year flood. It's literally, flood is like the disaster, right? And it never happens. And you look at some of these big floods that happen around the country in the past 20, 30 years. And a lot of times it's, whoa, this area never had any flooding issues. And
wasn't even in a flood zone.
Wasn't in a flood zone. And then boom, all of a sudden. And what's crazy too is when you're out of a flood zone, flood is like the cheapest insurance policy on your docket. It's like $350 to $500 most a month for minimum coverage. That's at least something.
Well, you get the preferred rating. So one of the benefits with the federal government is, if you're not quote unquote in a flood zone, you get a preferred rating, the preferred map, if you haven't had any previous claims, and it becomes very economical.
Yeah.
And then there could be benefits to that depending on your, I think too, is what's your approach when you buy this property or buy this asset? Are you looking to flip it? Is this a long-term strategy? I mean, buying flood, number one, gives you the benefit of making sure that if there's a flood claim, you're covered, but also two, it protects you in case the maps were ever to change, that would become to your disadvantage. And there's some technical terms, right? Grandfathering, whether it's built in up to code or built in compliance, continuous coverage. But having the flood also makes you a lot more flexible as well. Yeah. So, I mean, define flood, right? Most people still get confused a little bit too about water damage, right? Is it plumbing inside the house? No, it's considered natural rising water, whatever way it comes into your home.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can look at natural rising water. It could be, some sort of failure in a drainage or a pump system. And all of a sudden that water's not being drained in your streets and your sidewalks.
So even the human error comes into play.
Exactly. So if human error, I mean, we've seen that happen in some of our downtown districts where they can't really get those systems working properly. We've had a lot of flooding in Brickell or Midtown and right in my neighborhood. I mean, there's been a few days where I wasn't able to go down certain streets just because I knew my car wasn't making it through that. And that was just a normal storm that would just happen on any given day. And I just think people get really burned out with the home buying process. I mean, we've been doing a ton of closings. Yeah. Everyone's remote. Everything is just sending documents back and forth around to 10 different people. And it's like, it just never ends. And insurance is the last thing. It comes back twice or 3 times as expensive as they expected. And they need a ton of inspections, a lot of work, maybe coverage isn't as great as they want because the market's a little bit difficult right now. And then on top of it, they have an optional coverage to buy flood that may not happen for another 100 years.
Which is optional, right?
Exactly.
And then you got the insurance agent trying to upsell you to make some commission.
Yeah, and they've already kind of gotten passed around before different salespeople in different trades.
No one's told me I need a flood.
Yeah.
You know?
No, they all told me I didn't need flood.
Right.
Even worse. And then we come along and be like, well, not exactly. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, no, we'll talk later. But it'll never get addressed later.
No, it won't. And again, I just look at the way the lender requirements set up. The map doesn't necessarily exempt you from not getting a flood issue. We've seen the map. I mean, anyone can Google it in your municipality. You can ask your agent to run a flood zone determination for your home. There's been plenty of cases where the line is split between neighbors. So your neighbor makes you less susceptible to flood because the guys in Washington decide
even in the middle of a property. I mean,
down the line in the middle. I mean, there's issues going on there. I mean, flood insurance, based on the natural disasters, what's happening, especially if you're going to protect your property, that needs to be a bigger conversation.
Yeah.
Not just, am I in a flood zone or not, or my bank requirement, but how much is it going to cost, fit that into your budget, and really get that ultimate peace of mind.